Welcome to the Unshakable Foundation meeting of Cocaine Anonymous. This is a main share meeting, and today it's with great pleasure and lots of gratitude that we welcome Stephen R., who's come to share on the topic of accepting the plan outlined in the book for up to about 40 minutes, after which we'll open up for the Q&A portion of the meeting. So with that, Stephen, it's over to you. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you guys for having me, and thanks so much for the warm welcome. My name is Stephen Root, and I am a recovered addict. The power of God separated me from cocaine and alcohol on January 7th of 2008. And I'm really as grateful as I know how to be for that fact today. I'm here in Austin, Texas, and we were going around talking about the weather. I feel a little bad for y'all. We're having a beautiful day here, minus a little cloudy sky, so I'll try not to rub it in too much. So they were asking me, what topic would I like to choose? And I thought, I think a good topic would be taken from the doctor's opinion. Dr. Silkworth is giving us two case studies of men in Akron that he worked with early on. Before the 12 steps were invented, this would have been the 6 tenets of the Oxford group. And one of the men goes back into Akron City Hospital, Towns Hospital rather, to talk to Dr. Silkworth. And Dr. Silkworth says, I didn't even recognize the man. After he gives us the testimony of the man, what he's able to suggest to us is the man accepted the plan outlined in the book. And the book really then begins with identification. And to me and to every addict in the room, I think it's a pretty big deal when we're sitting knee to knee with another addict and we're really starting to connect, not only just in the fact that we've got a common problem, which of course is talked about on page 17, but we're really looking for some crucial identification in the beginning. You know, if I'm in a room full of people who had the same problem I did, and I feel like I can identify with what they did to solve that problem, I'm probably going to be a little more interested in the solution if I understand what the problem is. So our textbook goes into about 53 pages worth of detail on what it means to be an addict. And that was a really big deal because I had no idea what it meant to be an addict. I'd been called one many times, but I really never understood that every time I put a mind-altering substance in my body, I experienced a phenomenon of craving, an abnormal physical reaction that ensured that I could not control whatever I put into my body once I started. And another thing that kept tripping me up is that I used every known means to stop using, change of environment, falling in love, warning of a doctor, all the reasons that the problem user can stop or moderate on their own power. And I found that all those reasons were using occasions for me. If I even hinted of falling in love, I'm getting loaded. If I even thought about changing environment, I'm getting loaded. If a doctor sits me down and says, getting loaded is killing you, I'm getting loaded. So it was news to me to find out that when the book delivers this line to me, that we believe there is no middle of the road solution. I remember I'm sitting down with my grant sponsor, and he's saying, now, Stephen, anything you've tried other than the plan outlined in this book, which would mean everything from the title page to 164, with the help of a sponsor, and having a spiritual awakening as a result of that, going out to carry the message and then practicing these principles, anything other than that is middle of the road solution. So, you know, I worked with a lot of guys early on who they didn't care that I wanted to stop using one day at a time. They didn't care that I, really wanted to do something different. They really wanted to know, was I willing to take suggestions and follow directions as outlined in the big book? So on page 17, we're learning a little bit about the common solution. I start to get into the book a little bit, and I'm finding out for my own benefit, not only am I need to identify with the problem, but I need to figure out what the solution is. And they're talking about it on page 19, and they're saying that this book contains a useful program for anyone concerned with the problem of drinking or drugging. And they're going to combine experience and knowledge. And I think that experience and knowledge are very important early on. But I feel like once we stick around a little while longer, once we realize that just having the desire to quit using is going to get us a seat, but it's not going to keep us here, what I know transpires over time is that I begin to become interested in the language of the heart and the language of the spirit, right? As I get further and further into this program, it's not knowledge and it's not just experience, but it's combined with that spiritual language, that language of the heart, when two addicts are sitting with one another and really connecting. Because to me, there's a give and take at the heart of the 12th step. It took me a really long time to figure out that in the depths of my despair, when I've destroyed myself to the point where I can't construct my ego at a rate that makes any sense, that desperation, that moment is connected and can be connected to someone's 12th step experience. So in other words, they've got this circular way in which the steps kind of build into one another. And that's how I think we get the circle and triangle, this wholeness, working all three sides of the triangle: unity, service, recovery, mind, body, spirit, the solution being one of wholeness, at one with each other and one with God. And so we get over onto page 20, and now the book is going to tell us again for the second or third time what this volume is all about. It's going to say it's giving us specific instructions on how to recover from this illness. And we turn over on page 25, and I love the founders. They knew us so well. They knew men and women like us are looking for the third way out, looking for the back door, looking for the wiggle room. And Bill was really good at this. He learned a lot from the Oxford group, and he knew that we couldn't be held to the four standards of the absolutes, right? But he knew that we needed to be given a program that squeezed us enough into this level of desperation that we'd be willing to follow some suggestion. So I love on page 25, he's just telling almost everyone who comes in the door, look, you're not going to like this deal. You're not going to like the leveling of your pride, the confession of shortcomings. You're just not going to like this stuff. And I love that he's honest with us about that. But what he's trying to really get us to see is that if we're desperate enough to accept the plan outlined in this book, then all we're really being given by people who have recovered from this illness is a kit of spiritual tools, and they're to be laid at our feet, right? I've been sponsoring guys for a long time, for the past 18 years, and I've had very little experience with getting a man and shoving this thing down their throat and bringing about any more level of willingness than the guy who's coming in for the 13th or 14th time. Really what I've seen is that if the experience of the founders in the book and my experience and the person's experience prior to coming in doesn't convince them, then perhaps another trip out will convince them, and they're going to come back with some more willingness to accept the plan outlined in the book. And what I know about this thing, I didn't know for my first time when I came in at 22. I really did at 22 think this thing was about just not using and attending meetings, and occasionally giving out my phone number to a newcomer if it wasn't too inconvenient for me, right? I never did the internal work. I never really fully accepted the plan outlined in the book, which, as it turns out, is more about the internal spiritual condition than it is being relieved of the obsession to use every day, right? The whole purpose of the book is it's designed to transmit a revolutionary spiritual experience that puts me in touch with the power. And once I'm in touch with the power and I'm revolutionized from the inside out, and my ideas and my emotions and attitudes are shifted and cast to one side, and they're replaced with these bigger spiritual principles like love, tolerance, unity, service, then I am there's a pretty good chance I'm not going to be interested in getting loaded, right? So at the central aim of the 12th step, I think, is where we finally find out what the plan in the book is all about, right? It says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. I think the founders would have been pretty clear if the whole entire purpose of this program was just not using one day at a time and attending meetings. But I think what they're trying to really get us to see is that sobriety is simply a byproduct of a spiritual awakening. I mean, the program contained in the book is nothing less than a complete life change, right? I'm changed from the inside out. I remember when Ebby comes to meet Bill, there's this beautiful line. Ebby shows up, he's glowing. Bill can tell something has changed. I mean, have you ever had that experience? I've had that experience when I was actually 12th stepping a guy who I had relapsed with. And I'd had this revolutionary spiritual experience at this treatment center, and I was making my amends, and he was on my list, and I went to make these amends to him, and the man was still very much sinking into the mire that is addiction. He went from living in a really nice apartment to this tiny little apartment, and he's got everything squeezed in there. It kind of looked like the house of a hoarder. And I'm in there, and I'm basically Ebby to him at the time. And we sat down, and he said, Stephen, something's happened to you. I don't know what it is, but you're an addict. You're hopeless. There's just no way that you've gotten in touch with the God that's personal to you, and you've had this kind of experience with simply working the program out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was like, man, I'm here to tell you that's exactly what happened. You know, I've been inwardly reorganized. My roots grasp a new soil, just like Bill said about Ebby. And so on page 25, we get these two choices. And I don't really know why, but we seem to be the people of two choices, right? There's several points in the book where we're given two choices on page 25. They're restated again to us on page 44, I believe, or 43. You know, on page 25, it's like, look, you go on to the bitter end, right? You walk out of here, you go run this thing until there's no more running to do into a prison cell or a pine box, or you come in here and accept some spiritual help. And when we're looking at it, what is this spiritual help they're talking about? I think we're given a little clue on page 27. When Carl Jung and Roland Hazard, Bill's recounting this experience that Roland had with Carl Jung, and he's talking about this revolutionary spiritual experience, right? Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were the guiding force of Roland's life, suddenly cast on one side, a completely new set of conceptions begin to dominate him. Well, man, that sounds like a lot, to be honest with you. I don't know. I look back at myself when I was first coming in, and I'm just interested in not getting loaded, right? That's my goal, is like, how do I get this flamethrower off my back and stop experiencing all these insane consequences? Well, when I was looking at the book and we're talking about going to the spiritual appendix, the part 2, and I'm flipping over to this thing, here it is. It's in black and white. It's defined. Spiritual awakening or spiritual experience is simply a personality change that's designed to bring about my recovery from addiction. Like plain and simple. I always wanted to complicate it. I thought I've got to grow my hair out. You know, I've got to get a beard. I've got to wear a right robe. I have to sit in an ashram. I've got to take 7-day retreats. And no, we're on the course to find out where God has been all along. We're going to find out that God has been a part of us this entire time, that we've never needed to be anywhere doing any other thing but surrendering, right? Surrendering to the truth, complete and total concession, right? Total capitulation to the truth that I am simply one decision away from an entirely new life. And so we're looking at this page 29, and again, we're reminded we're getting clear-cut directions here. The plan outline of the book is clear-cut. It's specific. I'm looking at Jim's story. I'm looking at Fred's story. And in the whole chapter more about alcoholism, what I'm really noticing is that, again, the book is trying to point out to me all the ways in which I'm going to try to find myself an exception to the rule, right? I'm going to try to use my mind to figure out the problem. Where the problem resides, I'm going to use the broken thing to fix the broken thing. And I love in Jim's story, when they're talking about Jim, one of the things they identify with him when they're going to talk to him in all these different 12-step calls, or what was a 12-step call at the time. First thing, notice it doesn't say he failed to stop drinking and going to meetings every day. What Jim's problem is that Jim fails to enlarge his spiritual life. So again, time after time, the evidence suggests the entire purpose of the plan is to get me in touch with the power, a power that revolutionizes my way of living and thinking. And hey, if we need another example, we've got Fred. Fred's coming shortly after we get through the progression of the jaywalker, and we're lining our using experience up with all the progression of how the disease goes. And they say something similar about Fred. They say Fred would not accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. Anybody guilty of that? Right? Guilty of just coming in and thinking just not using one day at a time is going to be the solution. But what happens to me as a real addict is that the minute I put down my solution, which is cocaine and booze, something starts taking place in here, and I'm not treating the real condition with what I've been using it, with what I've been treating it with, which is cocaine and alcohol. I've been treating the spiritual malady with cocaine and alcohol. And now that I'm not treating it, it's doing nothing but getting worse. So in other words, if you just take cocaine and alcohol from me and tell me to go to meetings, you may as well just put me on a stopwatch. It's simply a matter of time before I become so restless, irritable, and discontent that I'm watching the door. And by the way, I'm building the case on everyone in the meeting. I can't stand the way she shares. I don't like the way he walks. I hate the way that guy's chewing gum. It's like I'm irritable in my mind. I'm restless in my body. I'm totally discontented in my spirit. And unless I link up with power, I'm out of here, Jack. And we look at how this spiritual answer and program of action happens, right? Unfortunately, and maybe some of y'all who have been around for a little while, you realize after some time, the spiritual conversion that takes place is not an end in and of itself, right? It's not that I just get to be awakened spiritually. I get to God, and Charlie, my sponsor, used to say, if it was that simple, the book would be 1 page long. Mark Houston used to say this too, my grand sponsor. God gets you sober, keeps you sober, the end, right? There'd be no other way. So the idea that God gets me sober and keeps me sober is just the beginning, right, of a complete life change. It's nothing short of a birth. When we get to the third step, there's nothing short of a rebirth possible. And I love the way that I think that Bill, we owe him so much, but to me, this is one of the great things that's made our program so accessible for over 90 years, is that when it comes to spirituality, we never put doors on this thing. There were never doors to begin with. I was reading AA Comes of Age, and I've got a little quote here. Bill, in the final hour, makes concessions for Hank and Jim, and for about half of us in the chapter We Agnostics. It says about half of us who come in, we want nothing to do with this God thing. On the next page, it says, you talk to us about our using problem, we're happy to talk about that. You talk to us about meetings, we're happy to talk about that. But we bring up God, I'm out. I got to go somewhere else, so I'm not doing this God thing. So in the final hour, this is out of AA Comes of Age, Bill looks at step 2 and decides to describe God as a power greater than himself. And what a gift for those who have such a big problem with that. Steps 3 and 11, he inserted the words, God as we understood him, which honestly is credited to Jim Burwell. But again, the doors they're off the hinges now, right? This thing's wide open. And then in step 7, final hour, he took the part out on our knees, right? So leads us into how it works. He settles on, these are the steps which are suggested as a program of recovery. So it's the final concession to those of little or no faith. Great contribution to atheists and agnostics, and indeed the gateway to all, so that all who suffer may pass through, right? There's no doors on this thing. There's no limits. And on page 45, again, we're reminded the plan outlined in this book, well, the book's main object is to introduce us to a power greater than ourselves, which will solve our problem, right? And on page 51, when we're cruising through We Agnostics, there's a really powerful line that I didn't see for a really long time. But it says, leaving aside the drink question, the recovered members of this program are about to spend a lot of time telling us why life was so unsatisfactory. And when I looked into this a little bit, I think that we're immediately given the evidence on page 52 of why life is so unsatisfactory when I'm just disconnected from power and just not using one stinking day at a time. We go into the bedevilments, right? We're looking at this page. Pardon me if I use the book. I don't want to misquote. But my experience lined up with this every single time. When I'm just not putting cocaine and alcohol in my body, I'm having trouble with personal relationships almost immediately. I can't control my emotional nature. Everyone's rubbing me wrong, or I'm rubbing someone else wrong. And I used to have this girlfriend who, after maybe about 3 days of just not using, she would say, maybe you need to go get loaded. So I'm miserable when I'm getting loaded, and I'm miserable when I'm sober, and it's because I'm suffering from something spiritual, right? The book says the root of my problem is selfishness and self-centeredness. All the obvious branches are the addiction and the consequences, and abandoning my children and living in a cardboard box and blacking out underneath a freight train. That's all very obvious. But what I've never looked at, what I never had any desire to do, was go deep into this spiritual condition. And so when we're looking at page 52 and I'm deciding, you know what, I might be interested in this God idea because my ideas don't work. And there I'm squarely confronted with this notion of, on page 53, I'm in a self-imposed crisis, right? No one got me to this place but me. And now the standard to believe in this power becomes much higher. Earlier in the chapter, I'm given some willingness, right? Will you express a willingness to believe? Yes, I can express a willingness. On page 55, now it's all of a sudden, it's like, man, you're going to come all in. You're pushing your chips all into the center of this thing. And this God, this power, this Sar of the universe, this spirit of all the different terms Bill uses, it's like, man, this is everything or it's nothing. So you're in or you're out. What's your choice to be? And I believe it's because we're reminded of how powerful no effective mental defense is, right? We're reminded at certain times, I cannot recall with sufficient force the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. So I cannot use willpower and self-knowledge to stop myself from starting again. And I'll make the most insane decision of my life, walking out of a meeting or a treatment center or a jail cell, and I'll pick up again from a position of stone cold sobriety. So my defense must come from a higher power. And now we got to go further into the plan. So it turns out the plan, finally, Bill gets us to a place where we need to take a look at some things on page 58, right? The simple program is for those who can be honest with themselves. So I have to decide, am I a cannot, am I a will not? I'm given a choice here. Am I someone who cannot be honest with himself, or am I someone who simply will not be honest with myself? Because if I've decided what you want and I'm willing to go to any length to get it, this is about where I'll balk. If I'm not all in on this thing, if I still think I got some idea of how I'm going to go out and control and enjoy this thing, there's one more lurking notion, there's one more reservation, I can get out and run it. I tell a lot of the guys I sponsor, if you're in that place, you may as well go try some controlled using. You may as well go try and stay sober for a year on your own power. Because, man, if you're not all in on this thing, you're going to balk going forward. And I'm looking for a marathon runner. That's what my sponsor told me. Steven, you're a really good sprinter. You sprint to a 30-day chip, to a 90-day chip, right? You sprint to a commitment, standing at the door, shaking hands. But when it comes to it, you're not around for the long haul because you never go in and do the deep spiritual work that this program requires, right? And to me, recovery doesn't begin until I take the action in 4 through 9. There's just no way for me to have a desire to sit around and be of use until I get out what's blocking me from this power. My sponsor used to have a way of talking about the third step. And he used to joke and say, the guy that he sponsors only thinks he reads 3 pages of the book. Well, what I know about that is that the third step is the linchpin. Just like what I know about step 1, that's not the only step in the book that talks to us about whether or not we're getting loaded again. The 4th step gives us some pretty clear warnings about whether or not I'm getting loaded again too. It says that if I cannot be free from resentment and I stay blocked off from the Son of the Spirit, high or sober, I'm going to get loaded. The book says if I'm not willing to straight out my conduct in my sexual life, if I go out and continue to harm others with that conduct, I will get loaded. Right? The book says if I skip on my 5th step, if I'm not willing to be entirely honest with someone, I might not overcome this thing. It says time after time, people try to keep to themselves certain things. Right? And we're given this first exercise in looking at the stage character. Guys, I don't know about y'all, but my ego recovers at an alarming rate. I start building a new stage character every time I get separated from cocaine and alcohol. Just look into your experience, see if it happens. A bunch of the ones I've used over time, the recovered man. I start building that stage character, walking into a meeting, right? In my experience, I'm coming back after relapsing after 9 years of sobriety. And the guy that was coming in and out of meetings, picking up desire chips, had a stack this high. The stage character was of the recovered man. I'm coming in, my life is on fire, and I'm sitting in the back of the room with my feet up on the chair, my hat backwards, I'm acting like I know everything. Dying in the rooms in plain sight of untreated alcoholism because I'm holding on to a stage character when I'm separated from the power, when I'm not working this program like my life depends on it. So this 4th step is very much an introduction into how self has failed me, which is another thing I didn't see for a really long time. Again, I thought the problem is cocaine and alcohol. I'm being told when I take a deep dive into this portion of the book, alcohol and cocaine, but a symptom, right? I got to get down to causes and conditions. I think the book makes a pretty clear case that self is a condition. It's a conditioned set of fear-based responses out of delusion, out of self-seeking that are bolstered by resentment and fear. And I identify with that. I think that's who I am, and I march that into a meeting. And I'm too scared to raise my hand, and I'm too scared to come all the way in. And so I'm the guy who's going to be coming in and out of this thing, never really surrendering because I think the problem is cocaine and alcohol. And so thankfully for me, this time, 18 years ago, I had a sponsor that was real big on working the steps rapidly. Right? He wasn't waiting around for me to feel like writing a 4th step. He wasn't calling in and checking me. Hey man, do you feel like writing those inventories? He said, Steven, you're going to sit down and write these inventories or you're going to go get loaded. Choice is up to you. You come in and you sit down and you do this work or you go get loaded. Brother, it's on you. And so I sat down like my life was on the line and I took a look at the resentment as the number 1 offender, destroying me more than anything else. And I was willing to set aside Did anyone walk in the room thinking they'd been victimized by a whole lot of people out there in the world? Did anyone have an experience of like just having a problem with, the world and everybody in it? Was anybody like me? It's just me versus the world. No one's doing it right. So I'm sitting there taking a look at this thing, and I'm looking at it from an entirely different angle. And now I begin to see some of this spiritual way of living and thinking begins to creep in to my desperate soul, right? I'm beginning to take a look at, what would I do if I was in touch with this power? Would I be able to sit across from the table from a person who I feel like had wronged me and be able to take a kindly and tolerant view? Would I be able to look at them as though I was looking at them through the eyes of God, right? Can I demonstrate to them through spiritual principle, not just waiting around to feel like showing them pity, patience, and tolerance? I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. But can I start acting on spiritual principle and look upon them as a sick person, like I am sick, right? And so I go into this fifth step, and I'm starting to see the need to experience some of these promises. When I look at how much resentment is blocking me, when I look at how much fear I live in, when I start to explore that beautiful part of the book, when I'm looking at the entirely different basis, I make this connection to a part in the book that talks about spearhead of God's ever-advancing creation, being an intelligent agent. And I begin to see my life as someone who's connected to an infinite source of power. I begin to walk around and think about, what would it be like if I lived my life free of fear? What would it be like if I was actually in touch with an inner resource that I presently identify with a power greater than myself? Could I live on an entirely different basis, trusting and relying upon God, trusting infinite God rather than my finite self? Well, I really don't know if that's possible until I sit down and read my fourth step during the fifth step. In order for me to get to those promises that the fifth step says are going to come to me as a result of doing this, I got to be willing to be entirely honest with somebody. I got to talk about the dark crannies of the past. I got to talk about the twists of character. And usually when I'm sitting down doing a fifth step with someone, I'll usually, because of the way that spiritual consent works, I'll go ahead and tell them, man, here's something that I wasn't going to tell my sponsor right off the bat, and I probably almost died by holding this thing in. You see, I believe there's a mutual give and take. I believe that this process it involves me have some skin in the game. This guy has to know that I've been in his position, that I'm maybe not in the exact same position, but he has to know that I'm deeply disconnected from God and I'm full of self when I'm committing these things. And now that I've been restored to sanity around the first drink and I'm trying to become spiritually fit, he has to know that I've suffered like he's suffered. And so we usually trade in the fifth step. I usually set forth the parameter for him to be this humble with me, right? Because I need him to know that I've been in his position. And so now 6 and 7, we get there. Well, if you're just looking at it on paper, 6 and 7 looks pretty easy, right? There's a prayer for 6. If I'm still holding on to something I'm clinging to, I ask God to help me be willing, and then right into the 7th step prayer. Well, if you've been around for any length of time, you might have experienced what I've experienced. A lot very willing to get rid of these character defects that were burning my life to the ground when I first walked in the door. But 15 years into sobriety, guess what? I've stopped filing these defects away as problems, and I've started filing them as solutions. It's like, why, when I'm cornered in an argument, am I getting angry and using rage to shut down an uncomfortable conversation? I thought I told God I was ready to have that removed 16 years ago, and here I am looking in my brain, and it's filed as a solution. Why do I feel like it's a little okay to be slightly dishonest with my sponsor if I told another guy in our lineage the truth over here, right? Why am I afraid to continue to seek God with the desperation of a drowning man with some time on my belt? Chances are I've fallen asleep. I went out and I had this amazing experience, right? In 8 and 9, I made all these amends. It took me 7 years to make every known amends I had on my list. I come from a lineage that believes to them all, right? I went to 3 different states to try and track down these people that I owed amends to, in Denver, in Texas, in Alaska, and it took me a long time to do these things. And I go out and I have this experience that can be described as nothing but total freedom. Getting on a plane, going anywhere in the world, not looking over my shoulder, pulling up to any state, any place in the U.S., not owing anybody anything. I go from that to living into the world of the Spirit and slightly getting in tune with that warning in step 10. Maybe many of y'all have experienced it, right? The one thing the book says is easy to do let up on the spiritual program of action. Here I come, sliding in to rest on my laurels. Here I am, 5 years and 10 years and 15 years. I'm seeking God every 5 years with a little more desperation than I did before. But something happens about every 5 years. One of my spiritual mentors identifies this. The plan outlined in this book, the longer I stick around, starts to seem like maybe something I can take a little break from. Have y'all ever had that experience? Where you're like, I was writing my nightly reviews every night for about the first 3 years of my sobriety. I think I can take a break at year 4, or I'm getting into meditation and I'm trying all these different means of meditation, right? Maybe like some of y'all, I become spiritually hungry and I have this passion to see God and I'm taking in all these books and all these literature, but something happens. I get full. I get spiritually full. But what I know now is it's the marvelous recuperative power of my alcoholic ego. It's convinced me that I've learned enough about God for now. Let me take a little break. You know what I mean? I deserve a little break. And so here I am resting on my laurels with over a decade of sobriety. I'm cruising into my 15th year, and I'm out on the side of this cliff. And Chad P., who is my sponsor, Chad Payne, my current sponsor, he 12 steps me on the side of this cliff. He reminds me in the middle of the day, this beautiful day, we're out climbing this cliff in this beautiful setting. He reminds me, Stephen, you're an alcoholic and an addict of the hopeless variety. You can't get away with middle of the road solution. I don't see you showing up at home group. I know you don't have a position there. I don't hear about the guys you're sponsoring. I don't see you doing your check-ins. I come from a lineage that's very high accountability, right? I come from a lineage that believes that we help each other stay sober. We invest in each other, right? If we're in the fellowship of the Spirit, we need to help each other out. We need to keep each other accountable. That's just the lineage that I come from. And so he 12 steps me on the side of this cliff, 15 years sober. And thank God for the gifts of desperation. Thank God for the gift of desperation. And thank God that God is there to give a hell of a lot of mercy and grace to an addict like me. Because I very easily could have retreated back into ego, which is the most well-defended thing on the planet, and said, man, you don't know what you're talking about. I got 15 years of clean time. I'm not going to use again. But something happens in me. Here is this recovered member of this program, and he's 12-stepping me, and a prayer began inside of me. And once I realized that God was working in and through me, then I took place in the prayer, right? And I became willing to submit myself to the work as outlined in this book yet again and have a whole new experience with God. 15 years sober, 16 years sober, 17 years sober. So a couple years removed from this experience, what's happened? Well, as a result of getting back invested in the world of the Spirit that the 10th step talks about, where I'm awake and aware and conscious to selfishness, resentment, dishonesty, and fear, and I'm doing the 4 things that I'm supposed to do to stay spiritually connected. When they crop up, I'm going to the power. I'm discussing them with someone immediately. I'm making amends quickly, and then I'm turning back to the line of the will. Back to being free and undisturbed. Why? Because the plan in this book has everything to do with me being an awake and aware and conscious and taking this awakened spirit out so that I can help not just other addicts, but everybody, right? When my spirit is awakened, when I'm in touch with this power, this program is a benefit for everyone that comes across me, right? But when I'm asleep on my feet, when I'm back in self, when I'm deeply defended, I'm a liability. I don't know about y'all, but I never needed a bag of cocaine to run my life into the ground. I can do it totally sober, right? Totally sober in the rooms. So now I have a new experience with step 11. And now I'm taking it like as marching orders, right? Now I'm really looking at pause as like an order. Like, what if my job description is outlined on 87 through 88? What if I really am supposed to pause when I'm agitated or doubtful? Why? Well, I think y'all know if I'm not pausing, what's happening is you're getting a full dose of untreated alcoholism right at you. Like, I'm like a laser beam with this stuff. I will eviscerate you because I am afraid. I am afraid that what you just confronted me with is the truth, and the truth when I'm not connected to God scares the crap out of me because that means that I'm responsible. I've got to do the work to stay in a position to be changed, but I so desperately want it to be you. I want it to be you that has to change in order for me to be okay. So I'm back to the 3rd step, right? I'm arranging everything, the lights, the ballet, the scenery, the rest of the players to suit me. So I wake up to the delusion. I'm pausing when I'm agitated or doubtful. I'm asking for the next right thought or action. Why? Because still 18 years sober, most of the time I can't trust my fine-tuned addict mind. It's always looking for the back door. I really have to be honest with you. And sometimes I joke with my sponsor and we're like, Stephen, you should be a lot further along at 18 years than you are. And I'm like, I know, man. I know, dude. I wish I was a lot further along. I wish I was so spiritually developed that this stuff just was automatic. But you catch me on a bad day, you're going to have a hard time convincing me that self is the problem, right? I'm going to be pretty convinced that you're the problem. So here I am back trying to practice this way of life to the best of my ability. I'm pausing when agitated. I'm asking for the next right thought or action. I'm reminding myself many times each day, God's will not mine be done. And I'm saying to myself many times each day, that will not mine be done. Why? Why am I interested in the plan at 18 years sober? Guys, I'm an addict. I'm an addict to the fullest extent. I do things for the effect. I do things for the effect produced. Dr. Silkworth was so knowledgeable about us. You know what? I stay close to God because I like the effect produced. I stay close to God because to be free and unblocked and watching the beauty of this world unfold in front of me like it was a movie that I'm not writing the script for, right? Taking a look at my third step decision, I'm just the actor. God's directing this thing. I'm just an agent, taking the power of God into areas of my life that I previously thought were impossible for me to be in. How is it that I'm able to pursue careers that I never thought were possible? How is it that I'm able to have restored relationships with people that I burned to the ground? How is it that I wake up loving every minute of my life? That's not possible for an addict like me. I'm all doom and gloom and me. So I take this power into areas of my life that I thought previously were unattainable. And I do this all as a child of God. No better, no worse, right? I can't walk around thinking I'm some expert at this thing, getting pride in the way of what God's doing. You know what, man? Recovery, that's God's success. That's not my success. I don't get to take credit for God's work. You know what I mean? I love this line, deeply hidden in the ninth tradition, right? They say, where do you want to hide? If you want to hide something from a good addict, you put it in the 12 and 12 or the big book. So I'm reading it one day, and I'm going to paraphrase it best. I usually have a copy of the 12 and 12. I don't, but it says something along the lines of, my disillusionment and drunkenness are not penalties inflicted upon me by members in AA who I don't agree with, who I think are making the rules. My drunkenness and disillusion will come as a result of my personal disobedience to spiritual principles. Period. End of story. My spiritual life, my spiritual condition is my responsibility. It's not y'all's responsibility. It's not my sponsor's responsibility to keep me spiritually fit. My desire to stay close to God and connected so I can be of service to other addicts is as a result of the amazing life that I get to live because I stay in a position to be surrendered. I got to continually call my sponsor. At 18 years, I'm calling my sponsor several times a week. I'm writing inventory several nights a week. I wake up and pray and meditate every morning. I sponsor about 20 guys, give or take, right? I have several commitments to carry the message every week in this program. I stay on the front lines. We take the message into treatment centers. We take the message into halfway houses. I started a meeting on my own, right? I believe in the three legacies, unity, service, recovery. I believe in staying in the middle of the circle and triangle. Why? Because of the results produced. So as it turns out, the plan outlined in this book has given my mother an experience with the son, has given my father an experience with the son, my sister an experience with the brother, right? It's allowed me to connect to people in ways that I couldn't possibly have done on my own power. So I don't get twisted. I don't take credit for God's work, but I do try and keep myself in a position to be changed. And so the plan outlined in this book is nothing short of a road to connect me to you with an open heart and an open mind and give me all the tools in which I can stay free and unblocked so that I can go out and do God's work. So nothing short of a miracle. Listen, I really appreciate you guys having me on here. It's such an honor to be able to share from such a distance away. I personally think Zoom is a really cool tool, right? I remember when we all looked at it when we were going through the quarantine and we're like, what? Oh, Zoom. And now here we are. I'm talking to people thousands of miles away. We're talking about the power of God. We're talking about the work of the 12 steps, and we're talking about the plan as outlined in the book. Thank you guys so much for having me on.
Young, would you like to come in?
I'll get started. Thank you, Isaac. Hi, my name's Young. I'm a recovered addict. Thank you so much, Stephen. Really good to hear you. Isn't it? It just blows my mind, this treasure map we have that leads us to the power from this absolute hopelessness. What's just come to mind is a line from the book, which says something like, if we've carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of his spirit into us. When was that moment for you, if you can recall it? Thank you. Thanks so much, Stephen. Great to hear you.
Thank you. What an awesome question. I first became aware of it after I did my third step prayer in a treatment center. I checked in. It was my third trip. And earlier that week, again, I'm the guy who's had 9 years. You can't teach me anything. I know all about this stuff, right? I'm here so I'm not living in a cardboard box. I'm here so I'm not living in a jail cell. I'm at the back of the room. I'm hanging around with all the guys that are not invested. We're cracking jokes. We're cracking on everybody. And a man came in the treatment center and he confronted us with the deadly nature of our alcoholism. Physical allergy, mental obsession, driven by a spiritual malady. And what he did was he really just took out all hope that I had for sitting in the back of the room any further. And what he did was he woke me up. We used to talk about, a real addict seeks real solution. And so I'm on the edge of my seat and I approached this guy. Nothing could have stopped me. You could have put a 300-pound man in front of me. I would move that dude out of the way. So he confronts me with the truth and he sits me down and we start talking about things. And he said, tell me what happened at 9 years and blah, 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 blah. And I say, and I chose to drink again. And I'll never forget this. He looked me dead in the eye. He closed his book. He got up from the table very gently and said, if you have the power to choose whether or not you use again, I need to find someone else to work with. Whoa. Hey. And thankfully we got to a different conclusion. But when we got to the third step, I got down on my knees and I prayed to the great mystery, to a God that I didn't know was out there. I didn't know if I believed in it or whether or not it had anything to do with me. And I can tell you that exactly the description of what Roland Hazard said happened to me. I woke up the next day. I was completely rearranged. I wanted nothing to do with those men. I wanted nothing to do with the energy that they had surrounding them. I wanted to seek the desperation with a drowning man. And I literally, it was almost like a tractor beam, pulled me into the book and just took my nose to the words. And I was like transfixed on fire. And at 38 days, when I get out of the treatment center, I'm knocking on the door of the director's door and I'm saying, man, you got to let me come back in here and carry the message. And he goes, you just got out of here 8 days ago. And I'm like, dude, I will die if I'm not on the front lines carrying the message. I got to be doing this. And so I knew something had happened, right? Something shifted in me. Something had a hold of me. And so that was really the beginning of the awakening for me. Yeah.
Great question. Thank you. Amy, you're up next. Would you like to come in with your question?
Hi, thank you so much for that. It was just such a powerful share. I got so much from it. My question is service related. So I feel like that is the only thing what I'm lacking on is doing service either in a home group or in a physical meeting. I do get a lot of advice from amazing fellows, and I do practice service in my day-to-day living, especially say for example my defect as well is anger and control, so that practice of halt and patience, Jesus, I think that in itself is service for me, to just not react to certain situations anymore and just be kind and considerate to, when I've got family and friends and even people in recovery who's helping us day to day. I'm always very grateful towards that. But what would you suggest for someone who's maybe lacking in service in recovery, maybe a little bit limited for time? What could I do more to push myself into that?
That's a great question. I think it starts with finding out a home group, a place that you can be accountable to on a weekly basis, and to get any position available to you at the home group. It doesn't matter if you're at the door. It doesn't matter if you help set up, if you bring cookies, if you help with the coffee, but to be in person where other alcoholics are and to have someone get to know you on a personal level, to eventually stick around for a group conscience meeting and find out, hey, what is this group conscience? What is their philosophy on whether or not they carry the message to treatment centers or halfway houses? Are they a 3 legacy group? Is it just a meeting or is it a group? And really to take some time and invest so that you're not just a person who is, this is a terrible analogy. Let me think of a different way to say it. I'll just use my own experience. I was sitting in the cheap seats in AA until I had a home group and a position in the home group, right? I was a guy who came late and left early. When I got a position at a home group, and it started off small, my home group was Primary Purpose Group. It was a greeter. And slowly but surely, the group conscience began to pull me in. And I really began to feel like I was at home. People got to know me, and I had like a place. And to me, I feel like that's the beginning of service, is when you feel like you have a place in this program, and a place in this fellowship, and a place to go. Other opportunities will open up. Like perhaps sponsorship is the way you'll be of service. Perhaps you'll get into the service structure. Maybe you're a person who's better suited to be a GSR or a secretary or the chairperson of the meeting eventually. Maybe you're at the front. But to me, it starts with you just picking a time and a place, an hour every week where you decide, I'm going to be at this place and I'm going to see what God has in store for me here. And if over time God's not speaking to you, you happily, you go somewhere else, but you go until you feel like God's calling you to be there. And then you get invested, you push your chips in, and you claim your seat.
Thanks, Amy, for your question. Ray, you're up next.
Hello, I'm Ray. I'm an addict. Thank you, Stephen. That was incredible. I love how you went through all the steps, and so personal to you. So thank you for that. It's inspiring. You talked about the importance of accountability. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that. Like, who are you accountable to and what practical ways are you accountable in your program?
That's a beautiful question. So first and foremost, I'm accountable to God, my relationship with God. And the second person I'm accountable to is my sponsor. And how we stay accountable to one another is we meet on a weekly basis. Right now, we're engaged in a big book study that he puts on Monday nights. And apart from the big book study, I make sure to check in with him several times a week. I'm writing inventory usually, and I'm trying to find a time to read that to him. However, we have other men in our lineage that we are connected with, both locally and across a lot of waters, actually. And if I can't get in touch with my sponsor for a 10th step, I call the men that are in our lineage. And we have what's called spiritual consent with one another. What that simply means is that I give you spiritual consent to speak truth into my life, because I would rather step on your feelings than stand on your grave. And so the principle behind it is that once you and I engage in this process together, we're keeping each other accountable to what it is that we said we would do with this program. Number one. Number two, when we make promises, we keep each other accountable to keeping them. Number three, when we're sharing or when we're discussing something that we may be acting out in, we're going to hold each other accountable and be accountable partners around some of that stuff. You know, if I'm having trouble with gambling, which I don't struggle with, but some of the guys do, practicing the 10th step at a pretty high level is I'm going to call my sponsor before I bet on a hand of internet poker. Right? And I have the spiritual consent. If I can't get in touch with him, he can call me or he can call some of these other guys. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk him off the ledge by practicing step 10, practicing 11, and then turning him back into service. Chances are we're really probably always acting out from a place of having fallen asleep on our feet spiritually, right? We're back in the problem in ourself. So another way spiritual consent works is that I give you license to call that out on me. Hey, Stephen, that sounds like a guy who's running the show again. You know what I mean? That sounds very egotistical the way you just said it. Is there something going on here? So we're really trying to use the tools of the program that we find in 3 through 9. And it's almost always about selfishness and self-centeredness. And how do we spot it? Well, because we have it. And I give you license to speak truth to me so I don't fall completely asleep to it. So that's kind of how that works. if that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Corda? Good.
Great question. Thank you, Ray. Becky, you're up next. Would you like to come in with your question?
Thanks, Isaac. I'm Becky. I'm an addict. Thank you, Stephen, so much for your very, very powerful message. I loved what you were talking about, the ego reconstructing. So my question was, when I was thinking about it, is sort of, how do you practice watching for that reconstruct? Because with it just being so deceitful, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, it has to do with Ray's question somewhat. But one of the things my sponsor always assumes is that I am regularly engaged in prayer and meditation and nightly review. So that's kind of the base level of buy-in in our lineage, which is he assumes up until you experience a high level of problem that you've been engaging in the spiritual disciplines that the program has designed for us to practice. And so how do I spot self? Well, honestly, sometimes I can't. But here's some warning signs. When I'm convinced that I'm right and there is no other way that things could be seen, that's a red flag. When I want to argue with someone for 20 minutes on end, huge red flag. When all of a sudden I have an opinion about someone and what they're saying and I've had no experience with it, that's a red flag. When I judge you really harshly for not knowing something that I just learned 5 minutes ago and now I'm an expert on it, that's a red flag. So these are all ways in which over time you begin to spot the reemergence of the ego. And the way that it kind of shows up is, another way that it shows up for me is, again, if I begin to pull away from the disciplines, I begin to make excuses. I begin to find other ways in which I spend my time. A part of what I didn't answer for Ray, but what I'll say to you is, I also need to be accountable to the guys I sponsor. They have to be able to call me out. We have that kind of consent with one another. They can pull me aside and say, hey, sponsor, this thing that you're saying, it sounds a little nutty. What's going on, man? Are you all right? And so that's another fail-safe I have in check, is that I don't ever want to be standing on a spiritual mountaintop lording down over the men I sponsor. I want them to have consent with me and say, man, some things you're saying, some things you're doing seem a little off. Are you okay? So that is also a very useful tool for me to look for the reemergence of self. Because if I'm getting some accountability from my sponsees, I'm probably a little far out in the weeds. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thank you, Becky, for your question. And thank you, Stephen, for taking the time to answer those.